appearances, Mohammad Mossadegh, Premier of Iran, meets the press to reaffirm his government's unwillingness to arbitrate with Britain over nationalizing the Anglo-Iranian oil company.
This is a real document. It was locked in a government vault for decades, and what it describes is the United States government secretly destroying a democracy, not an enemy state, not a dictatorship, a democracy, a country where people voted, where people believed their vote mattered, and the US government looked at that and decided, no, here's what they don't teach you in American history class. After World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union entered into this terrifying competition, not just for land, not just for weapons, for ideology, capitalism versus communism. And in Washington, there was this growing paranoia that communist ideas were spreading like a virus into Asia, into Latin America, into the Middle East. And so the CIA, this brand new intelligence agency, barely a few years old, was given a mission that was almost unthinkable. Go out into the world, find the governments that threaten American interests and remove them. Not through war, not through diplomacy, through manipulation, bribery, propaganda, and when necessary, violence. And over the next 3 decades, by most estimates, the CIA was directly involved in overthrowing or destabilizing more than 50 governments. 50, some of those were actual dictatorships, fine, okay, whatever, but a lot of them, a disturbing number of them, were democracies, countries where people had voted, where people had elected their leaders, where people trusted their institutions, and the US walked in and burned all of that down tonight. I want to walk you through 3 of those cases, because these aren't conspiracy theories. These are documented, declassified, confirmed by the US government itself, and I think once you hear them, one after another, something is going to shift in how you see the world. It's 1951 Iran, and the people of Iran just elected a man named Mohammad Mossadegh as their prime minister. He's brilliant, he's educated at the finest European universities. He genuinely loves his country. Time magazine named him Man of the Year in 1951, and he had this one big, radical idea. The oil under Iranian soil should belong to Iran. That sounds so obvious, right? Of course the oil under your country belongs to your country. But here's the problem. At that point, Iranian oil was being controlled and profited from almost entirely by the British Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which would later become BP. Britain was taking something like 85% of the profits from Iranian oil. Mossadegh looked at that and said, absolutely not. He nationalized Iran's oil industry.
Premier of Iran, meets the press to reaffirm his government's unwillingness to arbitrate with Britain over nationalizing the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. With chances of a settlement fading, the West's best hope is that this sickly man, in whose frail hands may lie the key to peace, is as anti-Russian as he is anti-British.
Gave the profits back to the Iranian people. The British went nuclear. They called it theft. They imposed an embargo. They went to the Americans and said, help us. And here's where it gets dark. The Truman administration actually said no. They thought Mossadegh was reasonable. They were willing to negotiate. But then Eisenhower came in, and the CIA director, Allen Dulles, sold him on an idea. What if Mossadegh is a communist? He wasn't. He was a secular nationalist. He hated the Soviet Union. But that framing, communist threat, was all Eisenhower needed to hear. In 1953, the CIA launched Operation Ajax. They flooded Tehran with cash. They bribed Iranian military officials, newspaper editors, religious leaders, members of parliament. They hired thugs to riot in the streets, posing as Mossadegh supporters to make him look dangerous and unstable. They manufactured a reality that didn't exist. And then on August 19th, 1953, a military coup removed Mossadegh from power. He was arrested, put under house arrest for the rest of his life. The Shah, an authoritarian monarch who was far more comfortable with Western oil interests, was restored to power. And for the next 26 years, the Shah ran one of the most brutal police states in the Middle East with full American backing until 1979, when the Iranian Revolution happened, when millions of Iranians looked at America and said, you are the enemy. And the hostility between the United States and Iran that you see today, it has roots in this moment in a democracy we destroyed for oil. 1 year later, Guatemala, same playbook, different country. Jacobo Arbenz was elected president in 1950 with over 65% of the vote, massive mandate. He was democratically elected by a very wide margin. His big idea? Land reform. Guatemala at this point had one of the most unequal land distributions in the world. 2% of the population owned 70% of the land. Peasant farmers, mostly indigenous, had nothing. Arbenz said, we are going to redistribute unused land to poor farmers, and we'll pay the owners fair compensation. Now, one of the biggest landowners in Guatemala was a company called the United Fruit Company, and an American company, a company that was so powerful in Central America that people literally called the region a banana republic because of how much these corporations controlled entire governments. The United Fruit Company had this land sitting unused. Arbenz offered to buy it at the price they had declared it was worth for tax purposes. The company said that's not enough. They wanted 10 times that amount. And when Guatemala said no, the United Fruit Company went to Washington. Now here's where this gets almost cartoonishly corrupt. The CIA director, Alan Dulles, he had previously worked as a lawyer for the United Fruit Company. His brother, John Foster Dulles, was the Secretary of State. He had also worked for the United Fruit Company. The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, he owned United Fruit Company stock. These men sat in rooms in Washington and decided that a democratically elected president trying to give land to poor farmers was a communist threat that had to be destroyed. The CIA launched Operation PBCES in 1954. They trained a small paramilitary force in Honduras, ran a massive psychological propaganda campaign on Guatemalan radio, made Arbenz think he was surrounded. He wasn't, but the psychological warfare was so effective. His own military abandoned him. Arbenz resigned, went into exile, spent the rest of his life bouncing between countries, watching his family fall apart. What followed in Guatemala were decades of US-backed military dictatorships and a brutal civil war that killed an estimated 200,000 people. 200,000 people for a banana company. Map shifts to Chile footage of Salvador Allende. And then there's Chile. And this one might be the most disturbing of all because it happened in 1973. This wasn't the 1950s. This was the modern era. This was Watergate-era America. Salvador Allende was elected president of Chile in 1970, democratically, legitimately. He was a socialist. Yes, he wanted to nationalize industries. He wanted to redistribute wealth. He was not a Soviet puppet. He explicitly said he was building a Chilean path to socialism through democratic means. And in Washington, that was unacceptable. Henry Kissinger, national security advisor to President Nixon, said this, and this is a real quote, recorded in declassified documents. I don't see why we need to stand by and watch a country go communist due to the irresponsibility of its own people. Read that again. The irresponsibility of its own people. He is talking about Chilean citizens who voted legally democratically. And Kissinger is saying their vote doesn't matter if we don't like the result. The CIA worked for 3 years to destabilize Chile. They funded opposition media. They worked to tank the Chilean economy. They supported and encouraged military officers who wanted to act. On September 11th, 1973, September 11th, Chilean military forces led by General Augusto Pinochet launched a coup. They bombed the presidential palace. Allende died inside, either killed or took his own life rather than surrender. Accounts differ. What followed was one of the most brutal military dictatorships in South American history. Pinochet's regime tortured and murdered thousands of people. Tens of thousands more were disappeared, taken, never seen again. And the United States immediately recognized and supported the Pinochet government because he was the right kind of authoritarian. Okay, I need you to sit with this for a second because I know what some of you might be thinking. This was the Cold War. It was a different time. They thought they were fighting communism. And look, I get that framing. I understand the context. But here's what I can't get past. These weren't communist dictatorships they were overthrowing. These were democracies. Iran had a prime minister who won elections. Guatemala had a president with a 65% mandate. Chile had free and fair elections that were monitored and certified. And the US government, our government, looked at those elections and said, the people chose wrong, we'll fix it. And then they lied to the American public about it for decades. When Mossadegh was overthrown, the State Department put out a statement saying it was a spontaneous uprising of the Iranian people. It wasn't CIA officers were in the streets directing it. When Arbenz fell, the official US position was that it was an internal Guatemalan affair. It wasn't CIA officers trained the paramilitary force that did it. This is a government that stood in front of its own citizens, people who trusted it, people who believed in it, and lied systematically for decades. The Iran operation wasn't officially confirmed by the US until 2013. 60 years later. Guatemala, similar timeline. Chile, it took until the late 1990s for the full picture to emerge. They hid this on purpose for as long as they possibly could. So here's where I land. These aren't ancient history. The governments that came after these coups, the ones the US installed or backed, shaped the Middle East, Central America, and South America in ways we are still living with today. The Iranian Revolution, the migrant crisis at the southern border, the generational distrust of American foreign policy across the global south. These aren't random events. They have causes, and some of those causes are classified documents in a government vault in Virginia. And the question I keep coming back to, if they hid this for 70 years, what else are they hiding right now? Not as a conspiracy theory, as a genuine, honest question from a citizen of this country. What decisions are being made today, in our name, with our tax dollars, that our grandchildren will read about in declassified documents and feel sick? That question doesn't have a comfortable answer, but I think asking it, refusing to stop asking it, might be the most American thing you can do. If this hit you, share it, because the more people understand this history, the harder it becomes to hide the next chapter. I'll see you in the next one.